conservative, constitutional. It's the Andrew Cooperrider Show, keeping you informed on what's going on right here in Kentucky.
Today on the Andrew Cooperrider Show, it's a troubling time. There's a lot of political turmoil going on nationally, and it's certainly worth discussing. But on the Andrew Cooperrider Show, we focus on specifically Kentucky politics. And at the end of today, I will touch on the Trump trial more specifically, how Kentucky politicians are responding to the charges and the complete destruction of our faith and perceived fairness in our judicial system. However, there are a few specific reasons to be of concern about things going on right here in Kentucky. We see the Republicans in the legislature pulling a big bait and switch that many of us saw coming on income tax and sales tax. Beshear issues an executive order to mirror the Crown Act. What is the Crown Act? And what did the executive order exactly say? And how does it allude to the fact that I guess Beshear and his administration are just full of a bunch of no good racists? Well, we'll be covering that, and we'll have so much more today on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. But for the first time tuners in on WBNA 21, this is our first show on WBNA 21, which is a TV station there in Louisville. And many of you possibly are tuning in for the first time online or on the radio. I want to tell you what this show is, the Andrew Cooperrider Show, what it is specifically about, and where you can watch or listen with a new show every day, Monday through Friday. There's a lot of fantastic national shows that cover important and impactful political news and commentary on the national level. But after having fought Beshear during COVID, when I refused to shut down my coffee shop in Lexington Brewed, I filed an impeachment petition in order to remove Governor Beshear from office for arresting people for going to church or attempting to arrest people for going to church. I ran for state senate, on which the establishment, in order to prevent me from getting into the Senate, redistricted me out of an open seat up against a newly elected incumbent that didn't even have a voting record, and then spent 5 times more money than I did, the most amount ever spent in a state senate primary by one candidate, according to recent history, was spent in that election against me, and I still was able to grab 45% of the vote. And then I ran for state treasurer on a platform of actually doing something with the office to prevent the constant waste that goes on with our tax dollars here in Kentucky. And that became the most expensive, of course, state treasurer's primary ever on the Republican Party. I came in second out of 3, and the winner of that, both of them spent way more than I did, but the person who did win did spend 6 times more money than has ever been spent in a Republican state treasurer's primary before. And so on top of that, I've spent years on activism, organizing rallies, etc. And after all that, I realized something incredibly important. And the biggest struggle I find is getting the average and well-intentioned conservative Kentuckian voter to be informed on what's going on at the state and local levels. Because there's not a lot of people from a conservative standpoint taking a shot at covering these types of stories. Instead, you end up hearing from, of course, the media or your local state senators and state reps. And the problem is that, well, obviously state senators and state reps aren't going to tell you what they did wrong from a conservative standpoint. The Republicans aren't. And then, of course, the local media largely is completely just full of a leftist bias, so they're not going to cover the news from a conservative side of things either. And so recognizing that people are having their votes and the way they're acting in politics, what they find important in Kentucky, affected by lack of coverage, I launched the Andrew Cooperrider Show. And it's the only Monday through Friday show in Kentucky that covers specifically Kentucky news and politics from a constitutional and conservative viewpoint. Now, maybe you're saying, Andrew, this is fantastic. How do I listen to your show all the time? I want to listen all the time. Well, right now, the video shows only come out on Monday at 1 p.m. on Rumble, X, YouTube, Facebook, and now every day, Monday at 11 p.m. on WBNA 21. You can also listen every day, Monday through Friday, on all major podcasting platforms, and also, of course, on the radio station on WZXI if you're in the central Kentucky area at 9 a.m. and 9 p.m. And we're actively working to get on more radio stations right now. So if you want to find out where exactly to listen, I said all that, trying to cover it all. Head on over to theandrewshow.com, hit the Listen Now tab. That's theandrewshow.com. Now, as I was staying informed means that you can't be duped into clapping like a bunch of trained seals, R-ing, oh yay, like a bunch of trained seals for people who are actually not doing a good job. And one of the recent, in common history, things that I bring up, dupes that was done on the Kentucky people has to do with CRT. Some of you may remember that in 2022, our legislature made a big deal about going ahead and addressing critical race theory. They made a big important show that they were going to address what was going on in our schools. And of course, critical race theory is simply the idea that our systems, our country are inherently racist, that white people, specifically white people, are inherently racist and they can do nothing to stop it. And that systems, while they don't hold people to different regards based upon their skin color, if, however, the outcome is somehow deviated based upon racial skin hue, well then that is a racist system. That's what critical race theory is. And what's interesting about critical race theory is in 2022, the bill to actually ban it, which was put out by Matt Lockett, the language in it mirrors the exact language as Stephen Meredith's bill, Senator Meredith's bill this year to ban DEI in K through 12 education. That may leave you wondering if the bill to ban CRT is the same as DEI in K through 12, but we supposedly banned CRT, at least that's what the media told you, in 2022, why is this still an issue? Well, it goes to exactly why we do this show. You see, here's a news article headline from 2022 from Louisville Public Media. It says, Kentucky House passes bill mandating how teachers talk about race and U.S. history. From within the article now, the provisions dealing with how teachers talk about race and U.S. history include model language featured in bills proposed around the country. The measures are inspired by national conservative backlash against lessons on systematic racism and implicit bias. Groups opposing these anti-racist initiatives refer to such trainings or lessons as critical race theory, or CRT, and have accused educators of using CRT to divide and indoctrinate children in leftist ideas. So that was a media headline, media article from Louisville Public Media in 2022 covering the bill that did pass in the Senate from Senator Max Wise, that quote unquote dealt with CRT. But see, it actually didn't. It didn't ban the teaching of any kinds of things like that at all. It simply said that you're required to teach certain documents that, quite frankly, you would think we're already teaching. Things like the Magna Carta, things like, of course, the Bill of Rights, the Constitution, and provide just the facts on certain issues. But it actually didn't ban any talk of critical race theory or ban any teaching at all. In fact, the bill was so non-offensive and so non-effective that the Louisville Teachers Union's boss just a few years ago was laughing about how the bill managed to satiate the bloodlust of the Republicans to ban CRT without actually doing anything. But because the media reported as dealing with CRT, and of course the Republican representatives, Republican senators, they're not going to come back and tell people, no, we actually didn't do anything about it. The media, being from the left, had an incentive because anything slightly tinging of critical race theory they were going to freak out about. And then, of course, your Republican representatives, well, they're not going to tell you they're giant failures. You wouldn't vote for them. And so you were lied to. And there's another thing you were lied to as well that just recently the establishment in Kentucky is admitting to, and that's that income tax here in the state that they promised to get rid of. Looks like it's not happening. We'll have more on that after this short break. You're watching or listening to the Andrew Cooperrider Show. We'll be back in a few short minutes. Are you a product, service, or business trying to reach conservative Kentuckians? Well, the Andrew Cooperrider Show can be exactly what you're looking for. Unlike anything else out there, the Andrew Cooperrider Show reaches conservative Kentuckians statewide through radio, TV, podcasting, social media, as well as email. Reach out to the Andrew Cooperrider Show to see if we have a marketing package that fits your budget. Reach out to the Andrew Cooperrider Show at theandrewshow.com. Once again, that's theandrewshow.com. You can hit the contact tab. Or you can also email the Andrew Cooperrider Show at info@theandrewshow.com. Once again, that's info@theandrewshow.com. Let's be the marketing solution that your business has been looking for. And you're back with the Andrew Cooperrider Show, your source for Kentucky politics. So before the break, I was talking about how the people of Kentucky, the citizens of Kentucky, specifically the conservatives of Kentucky, have been duped into believing that their income tax was going to end up at zero based upon a plan that has passed. Duped in the words of, you've heard your local Republican representatives, Republican state senators, maybe if you attend your local GOP meetings or rallies or Lincoln Day dinners or any of those things, you've heard them say, we are moving to get rid of the income tax, and the income tax in Kentucky will head to zero. Now, let me be very clear. Personally speaking, I am 100% against income tax. I find them to be immoral. I think it's wrong, immoral, and frankly, completely ridiculous that before you get to put food on your table, before you get to put shoes on your kids' feet, before you get to pay for your light bill, your utilities, your food, any of housing, before you pay your rent or mortgage, gas in your car, you have to give the government a percentage of your cut of income off your labor. Some would say it's slavery by another name. But regardless, I find it to be immoral and absolutely ridiculous. Putting that to the side. So you know I'm for getting rid of the income tax. Well, the Republicans in this state put forward an idea in 2022, and they passed a House bill, I believe it was House Bill 8 at the time, that would stair-step down our income tax. And so to give you an idea of how this bill was structured, in 2022, when the bill was passed, the prior year, our general fund receipts were about $12.5 billion. Now, that's not all that the state government spends. Obviously, we pull in money from federal governments and special set-aside funds, but general funds, as far as it goes, is the pot that money like income tax and sales tax and a few other taxes are dumped into this one solitary pot. And that's the pot that if you're going to trade out income tax for sales tax, well, maybe you need to watch what you're doing. Now, personally, I think the government spends too much. If you listen to the show at all, I've gone in detail over the spending habits of this Republican supermajority and how they're spending literally 47% more than Democrats were the last time Democrats had control of the budget, adjusted for inflation, their most recent budget. They're almost at 50% more in spending, adjusted for inflation. How do you explain that when you have a bunch of Republicans claiming that they're running on fiscal conservative responsibility, that the Democrats spend too much? But yeah, here they are spending vastly more. Interesting. But regardless, if you're going to say, you know what, we're going to try to keep it the same at least. We're incapable of tightening our budget. We're incapable of going ahead and spending less money. We have to spend more. But you know what? Well, not just more. We can't spend less. Every single penny is accounted for. So what we're going to go ahead and do is we'll get rid of your income tax, but we're going to make sure that we only get rid of it as long as we hit the same amount of revenue every year to make sure that we're not going to have a budget shortfall moving forward. Well, that would be something that I would maybe begrudgingly, but still accept, but at least say, I don't understand why you can't cut, but okay, we can move forward with that. But that's not what they did. Now, what they did in this bill instead in 2022 was they wanted to stair-step down that income tax based upon receipts into the government. So remember, we're at 12.5-ish billion when this bill is first proposed. Well, in order to get to 0% income tax, it would have required us to get to 20.5 billion. They'd stair-step down. So for an example, when you hit 12.5 billion, 12.5 billion is where we start at. 14.5 billion, it would take our income tax that started at 5 down to 3. 15.5 billion, they'd then step it down to 2.5. And every billion or so, they'd step it down about a half a percentage point until we got to zero at 20.5 billion. So you're not increasing taxes. This isn't a tax cut. Now, Republicans sold it to you as a tax cut. The legislators said it was a tax cut. Let me be honest. I'm a Republican. I'm a conservative Republican, but I still disagree with many things going on within our state legislature because it's not conservative at all. And passing a bill in an outline that says in order for us to get to 0% income tax, it would require that you would have to pay more. There's no way for them to bring in what would be over 60% more. That's a 64% increase in spending into the general fund, 64% in revenue into the general fund from what it would be to get to zero. Well, you can't do that without, of course, making you pay more for everything that you're buying. Is some way, somehow, through the income tax, through the sales tax that they're changing around. But somehow, some way, your net tax burden has to increase for the government to increase its revenues. The only way it can't is if we saw a massive population shift. And for a long time, that's what the Republicans in the legislature that voted for this were trying to sell us on. They said, by us modernizing our tax code, it will cause an increase in population into Kentucky, so much so that your overall tax burden won't increase, even though we're bringing in more revenue. Now, people like me at the time called this out as absolutely crazy and insane. Exactly what it was. This would cause an increase in overall tax burden because what the bill did, because while it got rid of the income tax, you say, well, it didn't increase the sales tax. You're right, it didn't increase your sales tax. Exactly. Instead, what it did is it charges 6% sales tax on items it wasn't charging 6% on before. And a lot of those things that it was now charging that 6% sales tax on dealt with B2B services, such as marketing. For an example, if a business goes and buys a billboard for $5,000, it used to be $5,000. But now, if they go out and buy that billboard for $5,000, it's going to cost them $5,300. And that cost, that extra marketing cost, then gets handed down to you, the consumer. You feel it in the price you're paying for things. And it becomes very obvious when we start looking at things like inflation numbers and as such here in Kentucky. Because when we look at inflation numbers and as such here in Kentucky, what we see, pulling it over now here, and the 3-month inflation at the beginning of the year here in Kentucky, so they look at the 3 months of inflation year over year and average it out, was 3.4% in Kentucky. Well, the national average of inflation was 3.2%, 2% higher just over that short period of time. It's not just national compared to Kentucky. When we look regionally, we see some interesting things as well. For an example, milk price in 2020, before the legislature decided to start taxing business-to-business services that would inevitably lead to more expensive goods and services to you, the consumer. But it wouldn't be a line item on your receipt. So you wouldn't think they raised the taxes. It's very smart what they did, but very corrupt, very wrong, and a way to dupe you, the voter. So milk price in 2020 in Louisville was $2.35 on average. And the national average at the time was $3.52. Well, the average now in Louisville is $3.20, and the national average went up to $4.35. So that's a 23.5% increase in the national price, while Kentucky's price of milk in Louisville experienced a inflation rate of 36.2%. It's a pretty massive increase. And it's not just milk, right? When we look regionally, so Kentucky right now, last 3 months, average inflation 3.4%, while the national average is 3.2%. When we look regionally, when we look at places like Ohio, we see 2.87%. West Virginia, 3.13%. Illinois, 2.98%. Indiana, 2.55%. Virginia, 2.66%. Tennessee, 3.1%. Missouri, 3.02%. As a reminder, our tax rate, our inflation rate is 3.4%. We are the highest inflation that we're seeing is higher than that of any state that touches us. Not only is it higher than 0.2% higher than the national average, but it's massively higher. We're the highest inflation state in our region. It doesn't even come close. And this consistent increase in higher taxation rate means that this hidden tax you're not seeing on your goods and services, that over the time since they've passed this bill, 2022, to now, what you've seen is several percentage points more expense on your items and goods. More than what everybody else would be seeing, more than you would have saw before this bill passed. That's the conclusion you can make here. It's obvious, it's straightforward. So granted, they didn't raise your taxes. No, instead they tax business-to-business services, increase the cost of doing business. They then pass that expense on to you, the consumer, and now you, the consumer, pay a hidden tax. But hey, they lowered your income tax, right? So you clap for them. You vote for them. You applaud them. In fact, we saw the establishment running attack ads against those Republican representatives who voted against this because they saw it for what it was. A bait and switch, a farce. It was a con. It was a con from the beginning. You cannot bring in more revenue without raising the taxes of Kentuckians. It does not work. But despite this, they ran attack ads against those who voted no on this. Continue to call them out. I personally have gotten into arguments with consultants on bad faith trying to claim that voting against this was somehow wrong, that Republicans voting against raising your overall tax burden was wrong because they framed it up the right way. See, that's why we do this show. Because we got to keep you informed here. We got to keep you aware of what's going on, or you will continue to vote for people who raise your taxes and you'll clap for them while doing it. And just how much more of your tax dollars that they've spent, well, we'll be covering that after this short break. You're listening to The Andrew Cooperrider Show. Now, if you want to reach out to The Andrew Cooperrider Show with your comments or concerns or your show ideas, feel free to email us, info@theandrewshow.com. Once again, that's info@theandrewshow.com. We'll be back in a few short minutes. Listen up, my fellow business owners, because I got to tell you about a business that's incredibly important to any company's operations, and that's Amston, A-M-P-S-T-U-N, Amston. It's out of Richmond, Kentucky, and they provide cybersecurity for commercial businesses, and they've got dozens of years of experience working with government and private entities alike. So reach out to Amston today. That's AMPSTUN.com, AMPSTUN, Amston. Reach out to them today. Tell them Andrew sent you over. And you're back with the Andrew Cooperrider Show, your source for Kentucky politics. Before the break, we were discussing how our Republican legislators have increased our overall tax burden through their con, right? While they call themselves conservatives, while they call themselves real Republicans, while they say that they're the traditional, normal Republicans, while they attacked those true conservatives, those true liberty conservative Republicans, this last election cycle. They spent hundreds of thousands, over $1 million, the Republican establishment did, here in Kentucky, attempting to take down real conservative Republicans in the primaries. Meanwhile, they didn't take down a single one, and they lost a few of their own. It's funny how the truth has so much value, isn't it? But anyways, in 2022, they passed a bill that increased your overall tax burden. They're selling it to you as a tax decrease because they lowered your income tax, but they taxed business-to-business services and goods at such a rate that it increased the final product's price, where Kentucky is now experiencing more regional inflation. Regionally speaking, we are experiencing more inflation than any single state that touches us. Now, that's not something you're going to hear on the media, and that's not something, of course, you're going to hear local Republicans talk about, because it points to a failure on their own policies. Policies that they demand you clap for them for and reelect them for. They actually run campaign ads talking about how amazing it is that they voted to lower your income tax. You should vote for them. Strong conservatives in lowering your taxes. Well, they actually increase your overall tax burden. A little bait and switch, a con. One huge con. How big of a con was it? Well, in 25-26, okay, remember the general fund is where the sales taxes go. It's also where the income taxes go. So if this was a real conservative majority, what they would have done is they would have said, we're going to cut income tax at a rate where, as long as when we started this at around 12.5-ish billion, where we started this at, as long as we hit that, every year we'd make a cut. That'd be a real conservative move. But instead they said, no. We have to see an over 60% increase in spending and taxation in order to get you to 0%. That's how we knew it was going to increase your overall burden. So, in the fiscal year of 25-26, their expected general fund expenditures here in Kentucky is $15.24 billion. And in fiscal year 2022, it was $11.9 billion. And that was an increase of $3.34 billion or 28%, adjusted for inflation. If they just kept spending to keep up with the general fund, they would have brought in, just inflation, $13.77 billion. So they're at 15.24. If they just kept up with inflation, they would have only been at 13.77. So that's about $2 billion more than inflation that is coming out of you, the Kentucky taxpayer's pocket. $2 billion more in taxation stolen from you on the promise of no income tax. I want you to remember that. Every time you start hearing these state reps tell you, it's your money, we're giving the money back to the people, blah, blah, blah. We hear state senators say this all the time with R's next to their name, say it's your money, it's the people's money, we're just giving it back to the people, we're giving it back to who it belongs to. Ask them why they spent $2 billion more than they did before. Ask them. Why are you spending more than if it's not your money, if that's what you really believe? Of course, they won't answer it. They won't answer it. They're afraid to. Well, now we're starting to get the truth from them. Knock down my iPad here. Now we're starting to get from the truth from them. Got a little fired up. And that is Osborne recently, of course he waited till after the primary, right? You don't want to say this before the primary, because then, the Republicans might make you pay for the fact that you have lied to them for 2 years. But anyways, he comes out this year from a Herald Leader article wrote by Austin Horn. He says, I think we have to be realistic with the fact that growth will not carry us beyond 3% in the foreseeable future. Osborne told the Herald Leader after a policy luncheon Thursday, hosted by Commerce Lexington, the area's Chamber of Commerce. We've always known it would only carry us so far, which is why every other state that has gone to zero has dramatically increased sales tax. Since the 2022 legislative session with the passage of House Bill 8, Kentucky's been on path to reduce income tax from 5% all the way down to zero. But we're not going to get there. It was a bait and switch, not without, of course, increasing sales tax. Now, hold on here, though. I mean, if they decided to go ahead and be actual Republicans and just spend less or even just spend the same amount as they are, we actually would hit it. Remember, it's because their plan, their process, their outlining of this system that they created requires us to spend more than we did before. Requires us to. That's why we won't hit it. And of course, all those reps, and I've heard quite a few senators and House reps claim, I was on Meade County Truth podcast when I was running for state treasurer, and I challenged them on this, and they said, well, we had on a rep here who, she told us that, that we would see an increase in population, and that's how we're going to hit it. I told them at the time, that's ridiculous. It's not going to happen. We're not getting 0% income tax with the current plan in place because it requires us to bring in more money, and we can't bring in enough people in. And the guys there kind of argued with me about it, but like, that's not what she said. That's not what she said. I've been right for 2-3 years now on this because I know math. I'm not an idiot, okay? You can't pull in more money without taxing people more. That's how it works. That's how it works. Now, I don't spend, though, my entire show just railing against fake Republicans not following through on their so-called conservative principles. No. I will talk about Democrats as well. And I want to bring up an interesting executive order from Beshear. The executive order mirrors something called the Crown Act. The Crown Act. And the Crown Act is a piece of legislation that actually the so-called Republican legislature created a committee called the Committee on Race and Access to Equal Opportunity, the DEI committee, created by Republicans who are now supposedly fighting DEI. Kind of weird how that works, right? Anyways, they created this committee and they had hearings on the Crown Act. And so what it's about is that reportedly that specifically black women are more likely to change their hairstyle in order to conform with a workplace's hair code requirement. And the Crown Act would call it racial discrimination to require that people have hair that aligns with your dress code regardless of their race. You're now the racist for holding everybody to the same standard because you won't allow them to have what is their quote-unquote natural hair. Now, something that comes to mind, quote-unquote natural hair. I also, like if I'm working, in food service, if I can't cover my hair with a hairnet or a hat or pull it back into a ponytail, hold it back, you legally, in Kentucky, cannot handle food. You'll get hair in the food. It's against the rules, okay? That's what the health department says. I've owned restaurants. Those of you who listened to my quick little bio at the beginning, owned restaurants. I'm telling you, you have to either secure your hair back, put it in a hat, or have a hairnet on. One of those in order to keep hair out of the food. But now, if you're a restaurant owner who tells a person with a giant afro, regardless of the race, just a giant afro, that can't follow the law and restrain their hair back, apparently, what the Crown Act would make it so you have to hire them. So we all just need to eat food with hair in it. And if we don't, we're just racist. That's essentially what the Crown Act is, right? But regardless, Beshear signed an executive order mirroring the Crown Act. But of course, Beshear doesn't have the ability on his own to create new workplace regulations. If you watched what was going on, though, around this over the last few weeks and read any of the articles, they made it sound like Beshear literally is writing new law, but that's not what he did at all. See, Beshear is limited to the executive orders. When he writes them, he's really just setting policy for the state as a whole. In this case, the executive order was specific to just the state government. And I'll go over what the executive order says and how it points to the fact that Beshear either is just doing this for symbolism, or he's just a government run by racists, which leads me to wonder why Democrats ever voted for him in the first place, then, if they really hate racists so much. Perhaps it's all a ruse. We'll have that after this short break. You're listening to the Andrew Cooperrider Show.
Lexington Overstock Warehouse is Central Kentucky's best source for stylish new home furnishings. Don't pay retail. With our low overhead operating structure and big name brands, we offer the absolute best values on new furniture for every room. Shop online anytime at LexingtonOverstockWarehouse.com or visit our weekends only showroom located at 156 West Tiverton Way. Right now, for listeners of this show, we're offering a special discount for our online customers. Use coupon code FREEDOM for an additional 10% off your online order today. Lexington Overstock Warehouse, low overhead equals really low prices.
And you're back with the Andrew Cooperrider Show. So before the break, I was talking about how Beshear has issued an executive order mimicking the Crown Act. What exactly does it say? Let's take a read here right from the governor's website himself, in case you guys want to know where my sources are. Generally speaking, it's from the state websites themselves, or I'll, of course, notate if it's from a news source. So this is his EO. The government of Commonwealth of Kentucky exists to serve equally all the people of the Commonwealth. Equal employment opportunity for all persons should be an integral part of our state government employment system, affording fair treatment relating to any employment action, benefit, or condition of employment. The fair and equitable treatment of all employees of all applicants for employment with the government of the Commonwealth is essential to the effective operation of state government. As employees of the government of the Commonwealth of Kentucky should be protected against discrimination in any form in their employment. Our state government is free from discrimination based on race-based hairstyles. So the Commonwealth of Kentucky should provide equal opportunity to all individuals in the provision of services. Now, therefore, Andy Beshear, by virtue of authority vested in me, goes on to cite the Constitution stuff, Executive Order 220-554 is rescinded and replaced with this order. It shall be the policy of the Commonwealth of Kentucky to prohibit discrimination in employee relations or the provisions of public service because of race, color, religion, sex, national origin, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, ancestry, age, pregnancy or related medical condition, marital or familial status, disability or veteran status. Employer-employee relations shall include but not limited to hiring, promotion, termination, tenure, recruitment, and compensation. Race includes traits historically associated with race, including but not limited to natural hair texture and protective hairstyles such as braids, locks, and twists. In accordance with state and federal law, the Secretary of Finance and Administration Cabinet shall develop and implement policies necessary to ensure that contracts entered into by the Commonwealth of Kentucky include language requiring that there shall be no discrimination in the provision of public services based on the classes set forth above. In accordance with state and federal law, Secretary of Personnel Cabinet, in conjunction with Governor's Executive Cabinet, shall take all steps necessary to implement this order. So what he's saying here is that his administration must be full of a bunch of racists that were not hiring people because of their hair type, which of course means that it's because they're racist and not hiring people because of their race, because their hair was tied to their race. And they're just using hair as a tie-in with, of course, their race instead. I mean, it had nothing to do with the fact that you don't want hair in your food or anything like that if you're hiring a person that's in charge of handling food. No, nothing to do with that. It's got to do with the fact that they're just no good racists. But either Beshear is doing this for show, most likely, or what he's admitting here in this executive order is that his entire department is full of a whole lot of no good, dirty racists. Doesn't really matter what it is, just leads to the point that, well, Beshear's clearly ineffective at what he's doing. Now, I've talked about a lot of state issues here today. Hopefully you found them interesting, but I am going to talk a little bit about the big issue on everybody's mind, the fact that Trump, in a completely ridiculous show trial, has found himself convicted of crimes to cover up some other crime of which we don't actually know what the other crime is. I'm sure a lot of you have heard a lot of commentary on this at the national level, and if you haven't, I encourage you to go listen to it to find out exactly why these charges are so ridiculous. And it worries me too as an individual, because I don't know, there's no way off this train that we're on. I don't see it. There's no way to release the pressure. There's no way that, no matter what happens in 2024 here in November, one half is going to think that the person who's the president is somehow shouldn't be the president through legal means. Not just like they shouldn't be the president, people disagreed with me, but that actually they shouldn't be the president. Because one half will think that he's a convicted felon, that is now holding our office. This is disgraceful. He's not legitimate. He should have been disqualified as other states try to sue him off the ballot. And then the other half, of course, if Trump loses, well, how can you ever think that was a legitimate election when literally Trump was convicted of crimes and may possibly be in jail? But regardless, we did have some Kentucky politicians making some statements. Andy Barr made this statement, says as follows. Not a big fan of Andy Barr, by the way, in case anybody cared, mainly because he's just super establishment. I'll get into that here. Andy Barr says, today, Congressman Andy Barr released the following statement in response to the politically motivated conviction of President Donald Trump. A corrupt New York district attorney pursued this conviction through a sham trial of President Trump marked by outrageous and unconstitutional tactics. It won't stop me and millions of Americans from acquitting the president of these politically motivated charges and sending him back to the White House in November. After 4 years of record high inflation, open borders, and foreign policy disaster, Joe Biden has another 5 months before he will be sentenced to permanent retirement by the American people. A lot of big words from a man that's not going to do anything. And this is where I have a lot of problems with some of these people coming out. Because while people like McConnell, like Andy Barr, who's obviously positioning himself to try to take that Senate seat when McConnell steps down, they generally speaking have stood by while this has happened. You see, every time Republicans have grabbed control, you have people like Andy Barr, people like Mitch McConnell at the federal level that roll this out. And you'll hear them say it all the time that Republicans are the adults in the room. Well, the Democrats have, while the Republicans were being the adults in the room, Democrats have set the room on fire. And instead of taking the gas out of their hands, like you should have years ago, you've sat by and allowed everything to deteriorate to where it is now. And it doesn't sit well with me to see these people now making these statements when they have contributed, in my opinion, to the situation we find ourselves in, where they have either given up ground to the left to let them redefine what moderate is, to the point where moderate, because, if moderate's the middle, you got people way out here and people way out here. Who do you have? The middle then is here. But if one person's staying still and the left keeps moving, well, the moderation changes then. But worse yet, if the moderation changes and then you've got people like McConnell, like Barr that say we need to be moderates. And I'm not just saying that's just something I'm cascading them on. Barr's heavily supported, millions of dollars supported by something called the Main Street PAC, which supports Main Street congressmen and senators, but Main Street politicians that work on getting things done for the Main Street and don't get caught up in all the political divisiveness. They focus on, quote unquote, getting things done, which of course just means using government to make your donors happy, right? But anyways, so they keep moving this farther along. Well, the middle keeps moving with it. And so when your desire to moderate, it means you keep moving farther left. Instead of staying strong in your viewpoints, instead of holding them accountable to saying, no, we are the same we've always been. Instead of doing that, we've seen Republicans like McConnell and like Andy Barr allow us to approach forward. And this is what's culminated in. A bunch of people not having stopped this early on is why we're in the position we're in now. But regardless, we did see a Republican outgoing state senator, Whitney Westerfield, who wrote an entire op-ed to back this up. But he said, disappointed in this statement, he quote tweeted Andy Barr, Whitney Westerfield did, state senator, not running for re-election. Disappointed in this statement, Congressman. The courts function as they should and a jury decide the outcome for better or worse. We absolutely cannot risk further eroding confidence in our justice system. And Whitney Westerfield, he backed up that statement he made on Twitter by writing an opinion article for the Courier-Journal called Trump's Guilty Verdict Prompts Some Republicans to Claim a Sham Trial, but I Trust the Court. I will not contribute to the belief that we cannot trust the courts as they place where we find redress of grievances. This is what he says here. Just bringing the indictment in this stretch of a case casts a shadow on the strength and validity of the other, much stronger criminal cases pending against the former president. So Westerfield, in his own article, admits, and in his Twitter post, he admits that he does believe that this is politically motivated, a stretch, that charges should not have been brought. But at the same time now, this state senator here in Kentucky, Republican, quotes there, is saying that he cannot contribute to the belief that we can't trust the courts. So you admit that the charges should have never been brought, shouldn't have been allowed, the case is horrible, but yet we should be able to trust the courts still. So we should trust the guilty verdict, even though Whitney himself says the case shouldn't have been brought. I don't tell you, Whitney, your own words contradict exactly what you're saying. Well, y'all, that's what we have time for today on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. I thank y'all so much for joining me. Those of you watching on WNA 21, I hope you had a great first time viewing me. Head on over to theandrewshow.com, hit the Listen Now tab, and see where you can listen to the show. Tomorrow won't be, of course, on WBNA, won't be a video show, but you can listen all kinds of different places. Well, until the next time, I'll be seeing you.